Okay, let's get started. Welcome everyone to our mid-year impact webinar. My name is Elizabeth Egley, Chief Development Officer at SBP, and I'm joined by our co-founder and CEO, Zach Rosenberg, and our New Orleans Executive Director, Kenneth Morgan. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. We love this event, and it gives us an opportunity to transport each of you from wherever you are in the world and bring you on a virtual site visit. You'll hear stories of clients, updates on our programs, and get to see the impact of your generous support. This is a 45-minute webinar, and we definitely have time for discussion at the end. So please type your questions in the chat if you haven't already sent them to me. We will be sending the recording of the call as well as some of the links referenced after the presentation. And if you find it informative or inspiring, please pass it on to folks in your world. Next slide. Here's our agenda for the presentation today. We'll tell some client stories throughout. You'll hear updates from recent disaster responses, including the recent Kentucky floods, updates on national programs like Build and Share, and we'll close out by sharing some of the exciting systems change work, and then get to your questions and discussion. First, I want to introduce you to Miss Marion Chauvin, a lifelong caretaker who found herself needing to ask for help for the first time in her life after Hurricane Ida. Years ago, when her family was growing, this woman helped to build an addition onto her house, learning how to drywall by going to the hardware store and hunting down, as she puts it, the dustiest guys in the aisle and asking them for tips on how to do it. Ida severely damaged her home, and we're so grateful that thanks to your support, we were able to expedite her project. We needed to move fast because we learned Miss Marion had recently become primary caretaker of her young grandsons after her daughter was diagnosed with a terminal form of cancer. She moved home earlier this year and shared how SBP's work was mentally and physically life-saving for her family. We're going to drop a link in the chat to this podcast where Miss Marion shares her whole story. She is so compelling and inspiring, and I hope you'll give it a listen. Listening to her sweet voice will put a smile on your face and maybe a tear in your eye, but we hear enough bad news these days. Why not balance that out with an inspiring story? Next slide. I'd like to start by sharing why SBP exists. First, we believe that home is the center of everything else. If you own a home, it offers stability and upward economic mobility. But when disasters hit and low-income families lose their homes, it could have generational impacts on the family. We exist to keep families in their homes and on the positive side of this tipping point. Next, we know that disasters don't necessarily cause inequities, but they certainly exacerbate them. Many of our country's disaster recovery systems are designed to help under-resourced families and communities of color, but these programs are driving inequitable results. We exist to level the playing field so all disaster survivors have the ability to recover in a prompt and predictable way. We know that climate change is causing more severe and frequent weather events. SBP exists to support communities to adapt to these changes and to be more resilient against storm threats. Finally, everything SBP does is based on the idea that disaster survivors are at risk of being pushed beyond their breaking point. I'll illustrate what this means in the next slide. Next slide, please. I'm going to share a quick video of one of our clients, John Rogers from Houston. He was born and raised in his home. He likes to talk about how his home was the center of the neighborhood growing up. His mom had dinner on the table every night, and more often than not, she was feeding many kids from the neighborhood. John worked his whole life in supply and logistics jobs, but fell on hard times in 2016 when an old eye injury caused him to have 5 surgeries and he lost his job. Then Harvey hit and everything just got worse. His son's room took the brunt of damage, and his son lost all of his belongings. He describes feeling so helpless because as a parent, you want to do everything you can for your kids. And just making ends meet, there was nothing he could do. He says that his life hasn't always been easy, but he has always been able to bounce back. But Harvey was just different. He lost hope and described sitting in his chair without being able to get up to walk. He had gained a lot of weight and his blood pressure was way too high. He thought everything was over until Chris from our team told him that SBP could help. I couldn't believe the story when I heard it, but that day, John says something told him to get up out of his chair and just start walking. He walked every day and got healthy again. He'd come home from the track and see our AmeriCorps team working on his home and said we were the answer to his prayers. John was at risk of being pushed beyond his breaking point. Thanks to the supporters of SBP, his life changed forever. Let's take a look.
My name is John Rogers. I was raised in here along with my nieces, nephews, but looking back, it was just this place that the doors was always open, always. So it was just rain, and water coming in, sheetrock fell all over the bed. All the stuff was wrong. I don't ever want to go through that again. I didn't have insurance on the house at the time. I was just trying to make ends meet with a young man and woman at my door one day. And I saw young people, man, so full of life. It really let me know there's hope in this world. They were all good kids. I could see that. And I could tell they wasn't from here. And they come here and they do this. It really made me feel good, and it really let me know this world we live in, that's good, and good trumps over evil. To the workers, keep doing it. Keep doing this. Keep doing this because you're helping, you bring a light to somebody's life. I had prayed for this. It came true.
Wow, we didn't know any of this backstory until right before John's welcome home party a few weeks ago. And we may never know just how deeply this work impacts our clients, but I'm glad we had the opportunity to share his story with you. Quickly, I want to share a theme of today's discussion: outsize impact. I'm not really sure that this is technically a term, but when I think about SBP's work, I think about the idea that our outcomes are often much greater than the investment or human capital it takes to make them happen. Through our presentation, we'll call out examples of programs that drive a strong return on investment or are generally driven by a willingness to do hard things and tackle problems that are not being addressed. We believe low-income disaster survivors deserve to have advocates for long-term recovery, that their humanity matters and should be prioritized. Thanks to all of you on this call, we have the ability to try new things and bring big ideas to fruition. Now I'd like to introduce Kenneth Morgan, Executive Director of Southeast Louisiana Operations, which is inclusive of Greater New Orleans and the Hurricane Ida impacted Bayou region, about 60 miles south of New Orleans. Kenneth, you've had a busy year. I'll let you share more.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hey, everyone. I am so grateful to have the opportunity to share the great work of our team. I'll share more about SBP's impact in the recent disasters, Hurricane Ida and the Kentucky tornadoes. We'll also dig into our national build program. I want to start with our Hurricane Ida response. This storm was one of the strongest storms to hit the Louisiana coast, but then it went on to severely impact communities all the way up to New York City. Our national headquarters is based in New Orleans, so this storm not only affected our team at home, but also at work. Being that this storm hit right in our backyard, it allowed us to respond quickly. We engaged all 5 of our interventions: build, share, prepare, advise, and advocate. And in doing so, less than a year later, 489 families have been served across 7 parishes. And we'll continue to do this recovery work for as long as it takes to ensure a complete recovery. But I want to take a moment and talk about Miss Ophelia Gaines, a client who we recently welcomed home. Miss Ophelia is a lifelong resident of Houma, Louisiana, and a retired child care worker who still keeps busy babysitting all of the kids and grandkids of her family, friends, and the neighbors. She evacuated during Hurricane Ida, but was devastated to see the state of her family home when she returned. When we learned of her need for assistance, we gutted the home and brought it back to life. Miss Ophelia was so thrilled to be back home that on the day we moved in, she wore her SBP t-shirt. We even presented her with welcome home cards that were handmade by Farmers Insurance employees from across the country. It was such a joyful day that I would like to thank all of our partners, donors, and volunteers who made this such a successful event. Finally, let's highlight an outsized input moment. As you know, it takes years for low-income homeowners to access federal funding to support home rebuilding. And the ones who need it the most are often the ones who are at risk of reaching their breaking points. While our rebuilding program, which is made possible by philanthropic donations, is able to help hundreds over time, often after big disasters, the need is in the thousands. So we started thinking about how private dollars could leverage federal dollars faster. We developed a program that will drastically reduce the wait time for families in greatest need. The Recovery Acceleration Fund, or RAF for short, is an impact investing program that allows private dollars to float the eventual federal funding so that repairs can be done now for reimbursement later. And thanks to our partners like Farmers and UPS, RAF launched as a pilot in Southeast Louisiana with a total investment goal of $10 million. And we've already started qualifying clients for the program and are excited to accelerate recovery for folks who otherwise would have to wait much longer. When we get this model right in Louisiana, we'll expand it to other impacted communities across the country. Next slide. Another area with outsized impact is our FEMA Appeals program. FEMA, as you know, is the government agency that provides emergency funding immediately after disasters. This funding is intended to help survivors meet basic needs. They're not intended to make survivors whole, but can do a lot of good if people are successful at being awarded funds. The problem, however, is that many people often don't get the funding they need upon first attempt. We noticed after Hurricane Laura in 2020 that survivors were getting really low FEMA payouts. So we started to see what would happen if we helped clients appeal. And it proved to be really successful. So after Hurricane Ida last year, we deepened our resolve to help impacted residents. This chart shows the success of the program to date. We've successfully helped 192 survivors increase their collective awards by 61%. And this week, we reached a milestone of $1 million accessed through the appeals program, which is, in my opinion, just amazing. By helping survivors access these available funds, which, if I may say, is our federal tax dollars at work, we are stretching donor funding further. I want to take a moment and talk about one of our FEMA appeal clients, Ms. Elizabeth Billio, who is a member of the Pointe-au-Chien Indian tribal community here in Louisiana. She is the sole caretaker of her disabled son. And when we met her, she was living in the shed behind her home because the damage to her home was so substantial. Our FEMA Appeals team worked with her to appeal her original FEMA award and was able to get her a nearly 50% increase on her home repairs. So great job to our FEMA Appeals team, and a sincere thanks to our partners who fund this program. Thanks to your support, we're not only helping our clients, but we're also training other client-facing NGOs on how to navigate this process for their own clients. Our FEMA Appeals team has expanded this program to Kentucky, which is a great segue to our next slide. As you may recall, tragic tornadoes devastated communities across 4 states right before Christmas last year. Western Kentucky took the brunt of these deadly storms, leaving a wide wake of destruction. SBP's Disaster Corps, consisting of our staff and AmeriCorps members, deployed right away, thanks to the financial support of many of you on this call today. These tornadoes wiped out entire towns, and communities are struggling to recover because of the lack of jobs and housing. Recovery will take time, but our team is supporting in a variety of ways that will have a ripple effect for years to come. In addition to our FEMA appeals work, our Advise team is providing in-depth trainings on disaster case management to local recovery groups, an important element to rebuilding homes quickly. We are also partnering with local nonprofit groups to ensure they have the resources to build homes more resiliently. We are also making investments into building homes with fortified roofs, which we'll discuss later. Next slide, please. I do want to give a quick update on the devastating flash floods that impacted communities across 7 counties in Kentucky. And to date, more than 1,000 homes have suffered major damage. This tragedy has taken the lives of 37 residents, and now areas are suffering from extreme heat and a lack of power. This map shows a measurement called Social Vulnerability Index, which uses census data points, including poverty, access to transportation or lack thereof, and housing limitations, to measure how vulnerable a community is. As you can see, these floods hit the most vulnerable part of the state, and we know that these families need a lot of help. Thanks to quick support from Toyota, Lowe's, and many donors, our team deployed to Kentucky this week to access long-term recovery needs. But we've already started to implement other interventions, like post-disaster recovery training, government support, and support with FEMA applications. We will keep you updated as our work progresses here. Thomas Corley, who is our Chief Recovery Officer, recently told me something that really stuck out that I would love to share with all of you. He said, "A disaster is not the storm itself. It's the human impact they cause. It's the conditions that position a community to bleed out longer than they should. That is the real tragedy." And I am so proud that our programs take a long-term view of this human impact. And we are working to shrink the time between disaster and recovery thanks to your support. And we'll continue to work and help families in need long after the cameras are gone. We've talked about our response to these specific disasters. Now let's take a look at our national programs. Next slide, please. I'm happy to share the impact of our National Build program. But before I do, I would like to give a huge shout out to our teams in Houston and Puerto Rico who continue to support families after Hurricanes Harvey and Maria, which happened 5 years ago. These operating sites have helped 973 families and counting to rebuild their homes and their lives. And also, shout out to all of the volunteers, the donors and supporters who are the reason why we're able to continue this life-changing work for so many years after these events. The chart that you see shows how we're doing towards our rebuilding goals for 2022. This year, we'll rebuild 655 homes, and we're just about halfway there. In addition to the number of homes we build for families, we started measuring the long-term impact of this work. On the top, you see that we have a goal to put at least 100 fortified roofs on homes this year. This is a code plus way of roofing that protects the home against future severe weather. Our scopes of work don't always include roofs, but when they do, we build them to a stronger standard. Also, we know that for our clients, their home is their greatest asset. As you all know, great things happen when people have equity in their home. This year, we started to measure the amount of equity we were able to preserve for our clients by rebuilding their homes. We have a goal to preserve $20 million in home equity this year, and a goal to preserve $100 million in home equity over the next 5 years. And we're right on track for this year's goal. I hope all of you are proud that this work you're investing in is not only measured by a safe physical shelter for families, but also is building generational wealth. Next slide. Lastly, I would love to give you a bit of great news about our Build program, and that is that we're bringing our Opportunity Housing program to Houston. If you are new to SBP, our Opportunity Housing program is a program where, in addition to rebuilding damaged homes after disasters, we are building new homes to replenish the stock of affordable housing that is often lost when disasters strike a community. We've built more than 220 affordable housing units, sustainable and resilient housing units in New Orleans over the past few years, for rent and for purchase for first-time home buyers. And now we're thrilled to expand this program. Our 5-year goal is to build at least 550 affordable homes in at least 4 more communities, and Houston is our first expansion city. The 2 renderings you see here represent 14 units to be built in neighborhoods that typically price out low-income families. Missing middle housing creates pathways to improve outcomes and economic prosperity for families because these opportunity neighborhoods have better transportation, jobs, childcare, etc. While these neighborhoods aren't conducive to large-scale complexes, these developments will make a big difference for families who live there. Additionally, we are building 7 single-family homes in Houston for first-time home buyers this year. A lot of affordable housing units are often 40 years old. And one day I heard the CEO of Enterprise Community Partners say at a panel discussion that about 40% of affordable housing units in this country would not be able to withstand a major weather event, which would in fact continue this cycle. So we are not only building affordable units, we are building resilient affordable units to a fortified building standard, which means they will be able to withstand extreme weather conditions. An example of that is currently we have 30 affordable rental units, duplexes actually, here in New Orleans. All of them were built to that fortified standard. And after Hurricane Ida, the most severe damage that we saw was a bent porch awning. That is really exciting news. And so a special thanks to Travelers, GAF, and Amazon for your support of SBP's Fortified program. Now, I'm happy to pass it to Zach.
Kenneth, thank you. And thanks to everybody for joining us today. Kenneth, your leadership in New Orleans is just exemplary. I couldn't think of a person who would better honor SBP's 16 years past investment in New Orleans, but who's more poised to lead the future of fortifying people against their breaking point. So thank you, Kenneth. And thanks for representing also as an executive director, the 7 other long-term rebuilding operators that we have across the country and in the Bahamas. I'm really excited to be with this group of friends and colleagues today. Many of you who have been with us from the beginning when we were 3 or 4 people working out of an old appliance repair store. And to see where SPP is now, not just doing life-changing rebuilding work, but driving these upstream and scaled solutions that at scale are fortifying people against their breaking point, just brings me more energy than you could imagine. And having leaders like Kenneth and Elizabeth and other folks on the team bringing SPP to that next level is the best. So I'm going to start with an outsized impact moment. Elizabeth, it is a phrase, at least here, because it matters. If you've been on one of these calls before, you've heard us talk about an SBP value called the mom rule. And what this means is pretty simple. As we do our work, we do it the way we'd want it to be done if it would relate to our own loved one, if they were the disaster survivor. If one of my family members or someone I cared about was impacted by a storm, I wouldn't care who helped, because the people in the red shirts, the green shirts, the yellow shirts, or the gray shirts, I would simply want them to be served in a prompt, efficient, and predictable way. And so in order to help more families, we share knowledge, we share funding, we share AmeriCorps members with other organizations who are within the communities. They're trusted by the communities, but may need for resources, staff, or capacity to really maximize their impact. We firmly believe that in the people serving world, disaster survivors shouldn't and can't be proprietary, and success must be measured by total impact, not just if we're following a process, and certainly not just by what one organization can do. So already this year, I'm thrilled, this is awesome. SVP has partnered with over 25 other individual nonprofit groups in 18 communities across the country and the Caribbean. And with these share partners, they've rebuilt more than 380 homes for families. This is double, a little bit plus the impact that SPP could have done by rebuilding houses on our own. And in addition, we're investing in the long-term sustainability of our partners and communities by training them on the IBHS Fortified Standard. This year alone, we have certified contractors in Fortified in Florida and Texas and Louisiana. And this is really important because it reduces the barriers, the skill barrier to driving a greater uptake of the utilization of Fortified. So thank you to all of our partners on this call who invest in SBP's share intervention. We can go to the next slide. So Kenneth just shared some of the tremendous human impact that our team has been able to drive. Thank you, and thanks to your support. The work of rebuilding homes will always continue at SBP. It's going to expand. We're going to get better at it. And that's because it's the right thing to do, and because it helps us be informed on how we can improve things at a system change level, truly get to scale. And why do we need to take this holistic approach and cause change upstream and at scale? And let me just go through 2 compelling reasons. First, as many of you know, and as this slide shows, the number of billion-dollar disasters is increasing. These are the billion-dollar disasters that happened just last year. You can see these events aren't just happening on the coast, they're happening everywhere. And there's just no denying that the cost, intensity, frequency, and the breadth of the places in our country are expanding and increasing. The bottom line here is that if we care about people, it's not sustainable or realistic to think that SBP or really any nonprofit group can solve this problem. Indeed, to meet the needs of the vulnerable families who are impacted by the storms, we need to start thinking about how we're going to change the recovery system, how we're going to drive resilience. The mom rule requires that we get to scale and we prevent people from needing SBPs or any organization's help in the first place. We can go to the next slide. Another reason why we need to get to scale, in addition to the heightened threat of increased disasters, another reason we have to get to scale is because while disasters don't create inequities, without a doubt, they're most certainly exacerbating them. Elizabeth talked earlier about the breaking point. We know 3 reasons why people are pushed beyond the breaking point: the amount of time between disaster and recovery, the amount of predictability they have or they don't have, and their access to resources. And if we look at these 2 slides, and we're happy to share some reports as well, we can see that while disaster recovery isn't really working well for many people in our country, for folks of color and people in low-income communities, it's even worse. Without it, well, hopefully we're past the point in our country where the policies are intended to have a disparate impact. But the reality is they are still having a disparate impact. The Rice University study that you can see cited on the left side of this slide, which was incorporated and cited by FEMA's advisory committee, indicates a really troubling fact. Where there's a greater investment of FEMA and HUD dollars, it's exacerbating the racial wealth gap. While with broad strokes, white folks are increasing their net worth, Black folks tied to greater FEMA investment are suffering a decrease in net worth. You can look at Harris County. The Black-white wealth gap increased to $87,000 after Hurricane Harvey. And then you can look at this New York Times article on the right, which is, to me, just heart-wrenching. We talk about, again, predictability, time, and access to resources. That's what's going to indicate whether someone's going to be pushed beyond the breaking point. The New York Times found that the higher the percentage of Black folks living in a specific zip code, the less likely applicants are to get an in-person inspection. Without a doubt, that's time and that's predictability. Further, in African-American neighborhoods that do get an inspection, almost 3 times as many folks of color are getting denied with no reason than folks who are living in majority Caucasian neighborhoods. And then finally, on average, Black applicants are receiving 5 to 10% less funding than white applicants. These are facts, folks, and no longer can we abide them. These are the reasons why SBP is so committed to driving system change and scaled impact. So we can go to the next slide, and we'll talk to you about a couple of the ways we're doing this. So last week, the Biden administration announced a new round of grant funding through its BRIC program. And BRIC stands for Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. This is the program's 3rd round of funding, and it's the biggest, $1 billion. The map on the right here shows 2 colors. Purple represents the communities that applied for funding to help rebuild or build resilient infrastructure, and teal represents the communities that won the awards. You can see this first round of funding went largely to the bigger coastal cities that have significant capacity to write for and successfully win these grants. As we saw from the map before, this doesn't correlate with where the greatest need is. I want to draw your attention to not just the purple, but also the white areas. So purple didn't get it, but the white areas didn't even apply. And they didn't qualify. And this shows exactly the underserved and underrepresented communities that in many ways are most vulnerable to disasters. But they don't have the team, the local capacity in the government, or the resources to apply for the funds and build mitigation programs and go through the pretty rigorous process of applying for the funds. If they were able to access this funding, it would mean a great deal to the low-income residents and their home value. It would mean a great deal for the community's economic opportunities for growth and for scaling up. If we can make these communities more resilient in the long run, this will reduce the burden on FEMA, on HUD, and on the NGOs like SBP. SBP's Resilience and Recovery Fellows Program is one of the most important solutions to this gap. We embed people in underrepresented communities to help them build mitigation programs, and then apply for the federal funding to support these programs' implementation. What we're doing basically is using human capital to bring resources to where there are none or very little, and to direct these resources to the LMI communities, largely who otherwise wouldn't have the capacity to write for the funds. To call out an outsized impact example here, we think that these fellows will demonstrate a massive ROI. The goal for each fellow is to earn their respective communities at least $5 million in resilience funding. But they'll also demonstrate their long-term value and ultimately get absorbed into the city's office as full-time value-added team members. We can go to the next slide. So the fellows support at-risk communities before disasters occur. And I'd now like to shift focus with you to helping already impacted communities to be more successful in helping low-income people recover faster. Earlier, we saw how the number of billion-dollar disaster events have increased exponentially. Well, each one of these disasters carries with it a federal funding package that's allocated by HUD and a local government office, whether at the state or the city, that's responsible for spending the money. The majority of the funding is used to help low-income families rebuild their homes or find safe and affordable housing. Unfortunately, it takes years for this funding to get to the cities and states. And then once it does, it often gets caught up in process and red tape that cause even more delay. Those who suffer from these delays are families at risk of being pushed beyond their breaking point. The Leader Practitioner course run by J.R. Sanderson and his team at SBP is a one-of-a-kind program that helps government leaders, those appointed by mayors and governors from all over the country, more efficiently spend their funds in a way that prioritizes impact and outcome to the same way that they're prioritizing compliance. In essence, it's a business-minded approach. Each of the public servants, no doubt, wants their programs to serve people effectively and efficiently, but sometimes they can use a little bit of help with strategy, with leadership, with navigating challenging situations. When LPC attendees complete their 3-day course with JR and the team, they're more empowered to produce the outcomes that are so desperately needed. This year alone, this is a big deal. LPC has trained more than 40 leaders from 21 communities impacted by disaster. In total, these communities represent upwards of $34 billion of federal recovery funds. And I'm gonna read a quote from one of our recent graduates. I'd like to share an example of how this program is shrinking the time between disaster and recovery, she writes. The cities and state leaders of these programs don't typically have the opportunity to design their programs with experienced professionals before implementation. SBP's typical LPC attendees come to fix their program once they're not working as effectively as they should. In Michigan, however, we were able to help 3 grantee groups via the state of Michigan, the city of Detroit, and the city of Dearborn. We helped them design their programs from the beginning, a right the first time approach. All 3 of these grantees were able to submit their action plans to HUD ahead of schedule, and this has a direct effect of shortening the time that people will need to wait between disaster and recovery. So to the team and those who are supporting this, thank you. Elizabeth.
Thanks so much, Zach and Kenneth, and thanks to all of you on the call today. You are the reason we are able to do all this work, and I hope you are proud of the impact you have made possible. In a moment, we'll start answering any questions you have, so please start typing them in the chat if you have them. And if you're inspired by this webinar today, I hope you'll share the recording with folks in your network. And here are some action items for you. First, storm season is here and we care about you, and we want everyone to be equipped in the face of severe weather, no matter where you are in the world. SBP developed an app with our friends at AT&T called Equip. Please take a moment to download the app and begin your family's preparedness journey today. Also, serve with us. SBP's volunteers and AmeriCorps members are changing people's lives every day. Whether you can join us for a day, a week, a year, by yourself, with a group, please consider joining us to accelerate a family's path to recovery. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask for financial support too. Your investment in SBP is the driver behind all this outsized impact we discussed today. And I have exciting news to share that I learned yesterday morning. At the start of hurricane season, June 1st, we launched our disaster preparedness campaign to raise funds in support of immediate deployment and disaster response. 3 generous friends of SBP joined together to match gifts up to $200,000. And not only did we meet this goal, but we exceeded it as of this week. Thanks to the support of friends like you, we raised a total of $435,000 and counting. These funds are already put to good use, helping to drive our response to the Kentucky flooding and plan for any potential hurricane deployments this summer. Thank you to our team and to all our generous donors who participated in this campaign. So now we'll open it up for your questions and discussion. You're welcome to take yourself off mute too if you'd like to ask your question personally. But okay, it looks like we have one question. Can you describe what the team is doing in the Kentucky floods? Zach, can I kick that to you?
Absolutely. So we're doing a few things. We have a team on the ground right now that is assessing damage and assessing the capacity of the local organizations. We are providing webinars and in-person training on navigating recovery, which means avoiding contractor fraud, navigating FEMA, understanding the whole mold dynamic. We're working with the local government to expose them to what we think are and what we've been told are best practices. We're raising a share fund, which we already have several grantees from last year's tornadoes in Kentucky to find organizations that we can invest funds, AmeriCorps members in the Toyota production system into, and we'll be determining if SBP is going to open an operating site as well. Also, with significant thanks to AWS, we are expanding our FEMA Appeals clinic to the people of Kentucky. We got some pretty brutal news from the governor's team yesterday or the day before, I can't remember. It appears, or at least it was represented to us by the governor's team, that some applicants feel that they're being denied. It seems like they're being denied as the roads are unsafe and the inspectors can't get to their house. And then applicants are being denied, those living in shelters 100 or so miles away, after their cars were damaged. They're not able to be at the house for in-person inspections. So the FEMA appellate work that SBP is doing, and I want to share, FEMA has been very supportive of this, where we've done it in the past, will be all the more important. Lori, do you have a follow-up question there, if that was Lori's question?
Looks like no.
Okay, did I miss anything, Elizabeth?
No, I think that's comprehensive in what we know now for sure. We have a question. What sites accept volunteers? Kenneth, do you want to take that one? Where are volunteers most needed now?
Yes, so we are accepting volunteers in New Orleans, in Southeast Louisiana, as well as in Texas and the Bahamas in Houston. And I know that soon, in a few months, we'll be accepting volunteers in Southwest Louisiana. And so we can put April, who is our director of our volunteer programs, put her information in the chat. All of our operating sites are always looking for volunteers. The need is always there, and we're able to do our work because of our volunteers. And so I would say all of our sites need volunteers, but currently we have opportunities in New Orleans, Southeast Louisiana, Houston, Puerto Rico, and we'll be bringing some more on soon.
Thanks, Kenneth. One question, how has higher mortgage rates and construction costs affected opportunity housing sales? Zach?
So great question. SBP is able to, and has always been able to, build below market rate costs for a number of reasons. And indeed, in COVID, when our volunteer program was shut down, we were still building for well below market rate costs. Our utilization of AmeriCorps members, very intentional procurement, having an architect working with our building team who are committed to disproving the notion that affordable, energy efficient, and resilient are not pitted against each other in a zero-sum game. And really generous in-kind donations from companies like Lowe's and GAF allow us to still build at about 40 or 60% of the cost of market rate contractors. We've also been very fortunate that in cities like Houston and New Orleans and soon in Terrebonne Parish, they're increasing the subsidies so that the homes are still affordable to the direct subsidies to the homeowners. They're still affordable to people at the same income level as before.
Great. So Zach, we're so proud of our team for 5 years in Houston and Puerto Rico. Can you maybe just unpack, like, why 5 years? Why do things take so long to fully recover?
Oh man. In this is what we've seen happen, right? We just wrapped up late last year our building operations in New York and New Jersey, 9 years after Superstorm Sandy. We're still doing Katrina related work today. Again, I remind folks that these are people who had achieved an element of American success. They were homeowners. We are sprinting to conclusion in Columbia, South Carolina, 7 years after the disaster. These are the system change problems that we're talking about. There's a huge amount of time between the disaster and traditionally when Congress allocates funds to HUD. In some communities, it can be 18 months. And then there's another 12 to 18 months until the money starts to make it to the ground for people. We can look at Houston. 4 years after the storm, I think the city of Houston's HUD funds had supported 50-something houses. Now we're approaching 5 years after the storm, and while SBP has rebuilt over 400 houses in Houston, the HUD funds have gotten to just a few more at 500-something. Part of what SBP has to do is support the cities and states to pre-write action plans and build an apparatus that's going to drive results faster. Our Recovery Acceleration Fund that Kenneth so eloquently talked about will really heal this wound. The most efficient municipal, city, or state process for getting people home is to allow reimbursement. Costs less money, it gets them home sooner. The homes are less damaged because they're not sitting as long. It works awesomely for people who can self-fund. But as we know, many people understand less than 50% of the American population has $2,000 in the bank. So they're not going to be able to self-fund. The Recovery Acceleration Fund, so generously supported by UPS, farmers, and others, that we're piloting in Louisiana, we believe is going to be a national model that will be scaled by groups far bigger than SBP, that will really prevent in the future it taking a 5, 7, 9, 11-year recovery.
Yeah, great. Shrinking the time from in a holistic perspective for sure. SBP is doing a lot more than rebuilding homes, Zach. Where do you see the organization in 5 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's 5 phases in the disaster system, from anticipatory in the beginning, concluding with community building in the end. And we will be either a leader or the leader in all 5 of them, but intentionally so. We don't need to be the leader in all of them. SBP we're about 9 months into a strategic plan with 3 key drivers: partnerships, technology, and intentional big bets. The RAF is one of them. And 5 years down the road, those drivers will have yielded success in the big bets. The share intervention will be funding $20 million a year into other nonprofit groups, as well as bring them capacity. Really, oftentimes when you donate to a group, 60 or 80 cents of the dollar makes a difference. When people invest into share, you get a $1.25 versus value, because all the money goes to the other groups, and they're getting AmeriCorps members in capacity for best practices. SBP building practices, you'll see quite a bit more of the St. Peter type building. SBP, and this will amaze some of you who were with us in the earliest days when we were working out of that appliance repair store, built the first net zero apartment building in all of Louisiana, and is resilient. So last year when Hurricane Ida came and people were being airlifted into what were called warehouses, our American veterans, low-income residents, families in the St. Peter were in a resilient building that had hot showers because of the solar and the batteries when there was no power for 3 weeks in the city, and cold air conditioning. You will see much more of SBP building at scale, affordable, resilient work. And then finally, I think what we'll see is SBP's leader practitioner course will be the go-to training for disaster practitioners at all levels of government. Really, we will be, through a strategic, holistic manner that you discuss, Elizabeth, reducing the time between disaster and recovery, not in a reactive way, but in a scaled system change way.
Great, thank you. Being mindful of time, but also wanting to address any questions or thoughts you all have. Anybody have any last minute thoughts? Well, on behalf of the whole SBP team, we are so grateful for you spending time with us here today and for believing in our work and the families that we're serving. If you are inspired by what you've seen today, we need you to spread the word about SBP. Help us do more and share with your friends. Don't be a stranger. Reach out if you have any questions or thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. Anybody on the SBP team would love to hear from you. You all have a great day, and thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Great work, y'all.